Welcome to Dust History. In 1453, after the fall of Constantinople, a Genoese merchant recorded something that haunted European courts for decades. He witnessed Ottoman soldiers systematically separating the wives of defeated Byzantine warriors from their children. But death wasn't their fate. What happened next was a calculated program of psychological destruction that the Ottomans had perfected over centuries. You're a young mother in Constantinople. The great walls that have protected your city for over 1,000 years are crumbling under Ottoman cannons. Your husband died defending the ramparts 3 days ago. Now Turkish soldiers are breaking down your door, and you're holding your infant daughter, knowing that what comes next will make his death seem like a blessing. Before we continue, if you find this type of forgotten history compelling, consider subscribing and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It genuinely helps us create more content like this. When the Ottomans won, the battlefield did not end in silence. It ended in chains. The men who fought were slaughtered or enslaved, but the true terror fell on their wives. For them, survival was worse than death. They were not simply prisoners. They were commodities. The Ottomans had perfected a system where women captured in war were stripped of identity and turned into property. It wasn't random pillage, and it wasn't chaos. It was law, codified, organized, written into the empire's machinery. The moment an Ottoman army broke through enemy defenses, a carefully orchestrated process began that had nothing to do with military necessity and everything to do with systematic exploitation. This wasn't chaos or the uncontrolled violence of battle. This was policy implemented with bureaucratic precision across hundreds of conquered cities and towns. When Constantinople finally fell on May 29, 1453, Sultan Mehmed's forces didn't simply loot and withdraw. They implemented what Ottoman military manuals called the harvesting protocol. Contemporary Byzantine chroniclers describe scenes that sound like something from nightmares. But Ottoman records treat these same events as routine administrative procedures. These women had a name under Islamic jurisprudence, sabaya, spoils of war, and the Ottomans applied the rule with chilling efficiency. The process began immediately. Specialized officers entered captured cities and separated people with ruthless precision. Men, women, and children were divided like livestock. Ottoman military law, codified in documents that survive in Turkish archives today, established clear procedures for what they termed population processing. Women were immediately separated into categories based on age, physical condition, and perceived value. The sorting happened in public squares, often in front of burning churches or demolished civic buildings, ensuring maximum psychological impact on both victims and any remaining population. Young women between roughly 14 and 25 comprise the most valuable category. Ottoman records from the Constantinople conquest list 4,200 women in this group, each assigned a numerical designation and estimated market value. These weren't abstract statistics. They were human beings reduced to inventory items in ledgers that treated them like livestock. The second category included women between 25 and 40, considered suitable for manual labor, but past their prime for other purposes. The third category, women over 40, faced immediate execution alongside the men, deemed too old to justify the expense of feeding and transporting. The psychological warfare embedded in these procedures was as carefully planned as any military campaign. Families were forced to watch the sorting process, mothers seeing daughters assigned to different categories, knowing they would never see them again. The Ottomans understood that this psychological trauma would spread throughout remaining populations, making future resistance less likely. The wives of fallen warriors faced a degrading inspection. Ottoman doctors and officials examined them head to toe, testing teeth, checking bodies, calculating fertility. Their age, beauty, and health determined their price. Young women with striking features were marked for Constantinople. Older ones were condemned to heavy labor or discarded into obscurity. But what the Ottomans did next reveals the calculated nature of their psychological warfare. These women were subjected to what Ottoman administrative records call systematic demoralization, a step-by-step process designed to break their mental resistance completely. The first phase involved forced conversion ceremonies that were deliberately humiliating. The women were required to publicly renounce their Christian faith and declare loyalty to the Sultan. Those who refused faced starvation, but those who complied were told they had betrayed their dead husbands and dishonored their families. The second phase was designed to destroy their maternal instincts. They were forced to care for Ottoman children while being told repeatedly that their own children were dead. Some were even required to nurse the babies of Ottoman soldiers, the same men who had killed their husbands. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating tactic was the false hope system. Periodically, Ottoman officials would tell these women that their children were alive and could be reunited, but only if they performed increasingly degrading tasks or provided information about resistance networks in their home regions. This created a cycle of hope and despair that many survivors described as worse than physical torture. The systematic nature of Ottoman practices becomes truly horrifying when we examine their documentation methods. The empire maintained detailed records because these weren't spontaneous war crimes. They were planned economic activities that required careful accounting. Ship manifests from the period list human cargo alongside silk, spices, and precious metals. A typical entry might read, 20 bolts Damascus silk, 40 pepper, 15 females aged 16 to 20 years, excellent condition. The women weren't even granted the dignity of names in these documents, just ages, physical descriptions, and estimated values. Imperial scribes registered every detail: a woman's origin, her skills, her beauty, her price. It was the ultimate bureaucracy of dehumanization. To the empire, these women were numbers in a ledger, proof of power written in ink. The nightmare only worsened on the road. Long columns of captives chained together were forced to march for weeks. Some collapsed from hunger or exhaustion and were left to die on the roadside. Others were crammed into wagons like sacks of grain. The slave markets of the Ottoman world were not secret, lawless dens. They were official institutions, regulated and taxed by the state. In Constantinople, Bursa, and Ankara, women were lined up for inspection under the eyes of eager buyers. Buyers could touch, examine, even test them before making an offer. A woman's skills were put on display like tools at a stall: sewing, weaving, cooking. If she failed to impress, she was beaten or priced down. There was no dignity left. The humiliation was the point. The most beautiful captives faced the darkest fate. They were funneled into the empire's harems. Forget the later myths of silk and luxury and forbidden romance. The harem was a gilded cage, a prison wrapped in gold. Inside Topkapi Palace, thousands of women from every conquered land were held in confinement, competing for survival under the watch of eunuch guards. Language, faith, even names were stripped away. A Christian woman from Hungary or Greece would wake up one morning renamed, forced to speak Ottoman Turkish, forced to adopt Islamic rituals. The harem was not just sexual exploitation, it was psychological annihilation. Women fought for scraps of influence, knowing that favoritism could mean protection and survival, while rejection meant abuse or death. Many never adapted. Some descended into madness, others took their own lives in desperation. The harem was not paradise. It was a graveyard for identity. One of the most documented cases involves a woman known only as Marta of Trebizond in Ottoman records. After the fall of Trebizond in 1461, Marta was the wife of a Byzantine military commander who died defending the city walls. Ottoman documents detail her processing with clinical precision. Marta was told her 3 young children had been executed when in reality they had been taken for the devshirme system. She was forced to marry an Ottoman janissary named Mehmet, who had personally participated in the siege that killed her husband. For 15 years, she was required to cook Byzantine recipes for Mehmet's dinner parties, where Ottoman officers would mock the weakness of Byzantine culture. The most heartbreaking detail comes from a letter Marta hid inside a wall of her Ottoman home, discovered during renovations in 1987. She wrote, "I dream of my children's faces every night, but I can no longer remember their voices. Mehmet tells me I should be grateful for my new life, and I smile and agree, but inside I die a little more each day. I have borne him 2 sons, and I love them, but they will never know their mother was once free." The children born from these forced marriages face their own psychological torment. Marta's Ottoman-born sons, Ali and Osman, grew up knowing their mother had been a conquered person, but they were raised as loyal Ottomans. Ottoman court records document that Ali eventually became a janissary himself, but suffered from what officials described as strange melancholies, where he would stare at Byzantine ruins for hours. Many of these children reported feeling torn between 2 identities, Ottoman by law, but carrying the hidden grief of their mothers. A surviving account from Osman, written when he was an adult, describes the confusion. "My mother would sometimes weep while cooking, but when I asked why, she would smile and say she was happy. I knew she was lying, but I could never understand what made her so sad." Conservative estimates suggest that over 100,000 women were subjected to this treatment during major Ottoman conquests, but recently discovered administrative records suggest the actual number may have been much higher. A 2018 analysis of Ottoman tax records found references to converted households that indicate systematic processing of conquered families on a massive scale. Each conquest followed the same pattern: separation, identity erasure, forced conversion, psychological manipulation, and forced marriage. But the Ottomans refined their methods over time, learning from each campaign to maximize psychological damage. The most chilling evidence comes from training manuals discovered in the Ottoman state archives in Istanbul. These documents, written for provincial administrators, contain step-by-step instructions for implementing psychological warfare tactics. One manual, dated 1521, includes a section titled "Methods for Ensuring Complete Submission of Enemy Wives." The Ottoman machine did not stop at enslavement. It went further. Captive women became producers of the next generation of slaves. Any child born of an enslaved mother automatically belonged to the master. Mothers were forced to raise children they could never truly call their own, knowing the empire could rip them away at any time. The womb itself became another tool of exploitation. Ottoman administrators calculated the optimal age for capturing girls, the most efficient methods for breaking psychological resistance, and the precise balance between exploitation and survival necessary to maintain productive breeding populations. These calculations appear in administrative documents that treat human suffering as engineering problems requiring technical solutions. The cold precision of these records, their matter-of-fact disgust, scion of torture and rape, provides insight into how systematic dehumanization became normalized within imperial culture. The psychological impact on surviving populations was precisely what Ottoman strategists intended. Villages and cities that witnessed these processing procedures often surrendered without resistance when Ottoman armies appeared on the horizon. The empire's reputation for systematic brutality became a weapon more effective than cannons or cavalry charges. The Ottomans deliberately publicized their treatment of conquered women, spreading detailed accounts through territories they planned to invade. The reputation for systematic sexual violence became a weapon of conquest more effective than any military technology. Villages would surrender without fighting, rather than subject their women to documented Ottoman procedures. When even enslavement was not enough, religion was turned into a weapon. Captive Christian women were dragged into forced conversions, ceremonies that had nothing to do with faith and everything to do with domination. Refusal meant torture. Acceptance meant the final severing of ties to their families, their culture, their entire past. Conversion made escape meaningless. Even if a woman ran, she could never return home. She had been erased legally and spiritually. This was how the Ottomans turned conquest into permanence. The battlefield might last weeks, but the fate of the women stretched for generations. But here's what historians are only now discovering. The Ottoman archives may contain evidence of even more systematic psychological warfare programs that were never fully documented. In 2022, ground-penetrating radar at former Ottoman administrative sites revealed hidden chambers containing thousands of personal items, jewelry, letters, children's toys, that appear to have been systematically collected and stored. Chemical analysis of these artifacts shows they came from across the empire, suggesting a coordinated program to erase physical evidence of victims' previous identities. But why would the Ottomans preserve these items instead of destroying them? Recent translation of coded Ottoman documents suggests these personal belongings may have been used in even more sophisticated psychological manipulation, showing women their children's toys years later to break them when other methods failed. Which raises a disturbing question. If the Ottomans were willing to hide evidence of psychological warfare techniques that went beyond what they officially documented, what other systematic programs of human destruction are still buried in archives around the world, waiting to reveal how far civilizations have gone to break the human spirit? The Ottoman Empire's systematic exploitation of conquered women wasn't an aberration of medieval warfare. It was a deliberate strategy that operated for over 6 centuries, documented in the empire's own records with bureaucratic precision. These practices shaped the lives of millions, created cultural trauma that persisted for generations, and remind us how quickly civilized societies can normalize the unthinkable when power goes unchecked. The archives are there, waiting for historians willing to confront this uncomfortable truth. The wives of defeated warriors were not just victims of a single conquest. They were the foundation of a legacy of exploitation that outlived them, replicated again and again across centuries. How does this story change your view of the Ottoman Empire and the true cost of imperial expansion? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more forgotten stories from history's darkest chapters, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The past has many secrets still waiting to be uncovered.